This is Burnout 2. Burnout 2 released in 2002 for the PlayStation 2, and on Xbox and GameCube it released in 2003. This is the point in the Burnout franchise where the franchise actually gets good. I say that because Burnout 3 was basically what supercharged everything, but Burnout 2 is a surprisingly good game. Burnout 2 does what a sequel is expected to do. It fixes up the shortcomings of the first game and also ups the ante on everything else, as well as adding a couple of series staples such as the crash mode. Like with my video on Revenge, this isn't going to be a review, but unlike the video on Revenge, this isn't exactly going to be a retrospective either. Consider this more of a first impressions video, given that I only have around 3 hours in the game at this point.
Hey dipshit, you haven't been in the game, why the fuck are you talking about it?
I like to yap, now shut up. Burnout 3 and Revenge were arcade games, but this is arcade. We don't have an actual lap counter in this game. All we have are the checkpoints and the timer, which, oh my god, this is a racing game that uses a timer and checkpoints. To my knowledge, the only Burnout games that make use of a timer and checkpoints are this and the first Burnout game. And to my knowledge, this has to do with the fact that the devs were trying to elicit the feelings of playing something like Outrun in the arcades. I will say, this game got bonus points from me right off the bat for being very easy to pick up and play. I mean, you have the championship mode where you just hop in, pick an event, and start playing. This game has a single race mode, just like Takedown does, and it also has a separate menu for the crash mode. Something else I wasn't expecting was the decent selection of cars you get to start off with, as well as the fact that we have more than 3 colors, unlike Burnout Takedown and, to my knowledge, Burnout 1. Granted, most of the cars seem to have the same assortment of colors, in white, silver, red, burgundy, yellow, black, and blue. Anyway, I digress, and we're not supposed to be talking about colors anyway, we're supposed to be talking about the actual gameplay. In terms of the handling, the cars handled pretty fine. I'd say that their handling is about on par as the later games in the franchise. The cars have weight behind them, but they're also nimble enough to dodge most traffic. Well, assuming you can actually see it. I'll be upfront in saying that there were a couple of instances where I turned around a blind corner and barely had the time to dodge traffic, and at sometimes I just didn't have the reaction time for it. Not that I was really disappointed to get blindsided. This is still a Burnout game after all. It's really at its best once everything goes to shit. Between the first and the second game, the devs realized that players like crashing their cars in the aggressive racing game, so they turned up the dial on the crashes to make things even more chaotic. I haven't played Burnout 1 for myself yet, maybe I'll consider doing that sometime later down the line, but at the very least, from what I've seen and comparing it to Burnout 2, yeah, I think it's safe to say that Acclaim and Criterion cooked with this. Takedown and Revenge are really fun since you get to cause the crashes of your opponents in those games, but honestly, Burnout 2 might have some even more frantic crashes. I think part of this has to do with the fact that we're watching the crashes take place in real time. Because impact time was on your boost button in the later games, and because you're likely to be holding boost during the time that you crash, more often than not, you ended up triggering impact time right as you started crashing. And both impact time and aftertouch are capable of changing the momentum of your car, so you pretty much already started altering your crash the moment it happened. That doesn't really happen in Burnout 2 since you lose complete control once you engage into a crash, and while obviously that means that you have roughly 4 or 5 seconds of not interacting with the game, watching the crashes themselves is still pretty entertaining, especially given that the cars have a tendency to just spin around like a Beyblade. It was both the gameplay and races themselves, and also the specific style of crashes in Burnout 2 that made me realize that I may have underestimated this game. I think the trigger was when I crashed my car in the highway and saw my car fly like 15 feet into the air, and I almost audibly went, how the fuck did that happen? A not so minor aspect of the game that I also had to adjust to was because this is Burnout 2 and Takedown hadn't come out yet, you can't force your opponents to crash in this game. They can still crash, but usually that'll come from the AI slipping up. Because of that, the focus here is on going fast, driving dangerously, and not getting clipped by traffic. Oh, and also adjusting to how boost works in this game, because Burnout 2's boost system is different from what we would get in 3 and 4. The only reason I wasn't completely thrown off by the boost system in Burnout 2, well, at least not for very long, was because it got brought back in Burnout Paradise with the speed cars. If you hadn't experienced it before, the way that boost works in the older Burnout games is that you don't have access to it all the time. You gotta charge it up first by doing dangerous driving, and then once it's filled, you're able to activate it. However, if you let go of the boost at any time, you cannot start it up again until you refill the boost meter. So instead, you gotta hold the trigger until the boost is empty, and thus activating the game's namesake. Holding down the boost until it's empty will actually refill the boost meter depending on how much reckless driving you've done. If you've done enough of it, then you'll get a burnout, which basically starts the boost chain again. So the rhythm and flow of this game is doing a bunch of reckless driving to fill up the boost meter, and then doing more of it while boosting in order to chain burnouts back to back so you can keep going fast for as long as possible. At least until you crash, or fail to do enough to keep another burnout going, which will result in your chain breaking. In the case of crashes, you always lose a bit of your burnout meter when you end up crashing. And if you crash before you end up finishing a burnout, well, there goes most of your boost, you're gonna have to fill it all the way again. I found that the best way to try to chain multiple burnouts together is to try to drive an oncoming for as long as possible. Unfortunately, it's also the worst way to try to keep a burnout going since traffic is going to be coming straight at you. As far as the game's available modes, well, from what I know, you mainly have your championship, which is how you unlock most of the content by doing a lot of Grand Prix, and also getting access to individual cars by doing face-off events or by doing pursuit events, which has you driving as a cop car attempting to shut down another racer. Single race and time attack, which are quite self-explanatory, and finally the crash mode. Oddly enough, the crash mode isn't actually a part of the campaign and is more a separate thing, unlike the later games, which is a bit of a shame because this iteration of crash mode is arguably one of the best despite how simple it is. There's no tokens or anything like that and definitely no impact time. You just drive your car into the crash and hope for the best. I haven't played much of crash mode yet, but what little I have played was still pretty enjoyable. Though crash mode was not really the mode that I sunk most of my time into in these games anyway. Well, maybe with the exception of Revenge, but that's because I started doing the events a bit later. I suppose I could take a moment to highlight some of the things that I like about this game and a few of the flaws. The game has its own soundtrack during races, and that soundtrack is actually dynamic. It gets more energetic when you're boosting, which is a pretty nice touch. And I think it gets a little bit quieter once you crash. This game actually has post-race replays, which I think is good in general. The car models look pretty solid for 2002. The game actually rewards you with boost for airtime, which is something that got removed in Takedown for some reason. And I actually like how the game has different weather conditions for the same courses. As far as nitpicks go, not being able to take anyone out outside of pursuit mode is fine. I understand why that's the case. What I don't get is why you can't get boosts from drafting. The Grand Prix events might be getting a bit long. I'm only 3 hours in and I can already see that there's a Grand Prix that has 6 events. We start with 3, then 4, then 5, now we're at 6. I feel like it's starting to push it a little. I'm not entirely sure, but it doesn't seem like the vehicle being pursued in the chase modes will actually take damage if they hit a wall or something. Like, the only way that they take damage is if the player car comes into contact with them, which seems like a bit of an oversight. And finally, the game's rubber banding. It hasn't caused me too many issues, but it's definitely forced a restart here and there. Other than that, yeah, it's safe to say that this is a pretty damn good Burnout game, which, admittedly, I kind of already knew about that, but after seeing the crashes for myself, that's when I really knew this was something. No, I wouldn't call this game the best in the franchise. The later entries have too much going for them for me to go that far, but I will absolutely call this game a classic, and I will be playing more of it. Who knows, maybe some of you would like to see a Crash compilation. I've enjoyed watching a few of those on YouTube, and I don't think there's that many of them for this game. Anyway, this has been an hour rambling about another Burnout game. I promise I'll get to Burnout 3 soon, maybe, potentially. Thank you and have a good day.